I'm César Ferreira from the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at UWM. I'm here with Professor Steve Sadow from Northeastern University in Massachusetts. He is a scholar on Jewish Latin American writing. Steve, welcome to UWM. And my question is, how do you see Jewish Latin American writing, and what importance does it have in Latin American letters?
I want to introduce myself in a negative way. First of all, I'm not Latin American. Second of all, I'm not a poet or even a fiction writer, I have been called by many as an honorary Latin American Jew. This happened, I became one, I suppose, if that's true, through a long series of experiences. To the age of, I was brought up in suburban New York. I had a standard Jewish education with a bar mitzvah and a couple of years more of what was called Hebrew high school. So I had a Jewish background, but it wasn't the determinant to my life. I was part of the American scene. It wasn't until I was well into graduate school, I was about 27 years old, I was working on a thesis based on Argentine and Chilean literature, and I was bored. So I was in Widener Library at Harvard, and I started walking around the stacks. And I noticed that in the Argentine section especially, many of the books had on their spines had Jewish names. The authors were clearly Jewish. I picked up the books and I was astounded. This was wonderful stuff that nobody had ever mentioned, no professor of mine had ever alluded to, and gave me an absolutely different picture of Latin America, of Jewish people in another circumstance. It wasn't the first I'd encountered. I'd read European literature, but and this was wondrous to me. It was also, career-wise, a way of not having to study Spanish saints for the rest of my life. But in any case, so I started reading in that area of prose, poetry, anything I could get my hand on, beyond what Harvard had, and then later. And then a divine intervention took place. I received a packet in the mail from Argentina. It had solely a novel in it and a curriculum vitae, nothing more. It was from Ricardo Feuerstein, an Argentine novelist, became an essayist, was a poet at the same time. I was an assistant professor looking for a writer to hook onto so I could write some articles and maybe get tenure. Okay. That was and then after knowing Ricardo by correspondence for a while, I went down to see him. And that was my entry into personalized Latin American Jewish culture, and especially Latin American Jewish writers and artists. Ricardo, besides being a writer himself, was a book publisher, and therefore knew very, very many people in the Jewish cultural system of Argentina, Uruguay, a little bit further than that. Latin American Jewish literature segmented by country. It's hard for people in one country to get the literature of other countries. So, okay, I started with Argentina. And as it grew, as my experience grew, the fascination grew. I started to feel like this was really the Jewish literature and the Jewish writers, and later the Jewish artists, that I wanted to be with. That I was somehow not American. I was somehow more like these people without being these people. Okay. And then I decided, what can I do with this? Well, I can write scholarly articles, and I've done that. But I felt I had to show the world that this material was great, that it existed, that it was proliferous, and that people ought to know about it. And not only people outside of Latin America, people within Latin America. First, other Jews should know about it, but then the Latin American public, to the extent I could do, and the American public, one gets grandiose about this. And after a while, I noticed that there was a limited number of people interested, but even to them, I wanted to get to them. And so and especially after the bombing of the Army in 1994, the bombing of being the Argentine Mutual Jewish Federation, really, I felt in my guts I had to do this. That really was a life-changing experience, although I wasn't there. Since then, I, with my co-translator, Jim Cates, have done enormous amount of poetry translation. I have to say that fairly. We've done a lot. I've translated 2 novels, maybe 3 if you count something else. So as a translator, I tried to get the word out to the English-speaking part of the world. But that was one step. The step that I alluded to before was to be a promoter, to get the word out. To get the word out in any way I could. And one, in Argentina in 2001, 2003, and 2005, Ricardo Firestein and I did cultural festivals. They were called encuentros, where we would go 3 days steady with Jewish culture, from music to art, large art exhibitions, to literary criticism, to panels of journalists, to anyone who could find, really. And the quality was astounding. And the number of people who came was huge. Each one was a little bit different. The second one was more on the visual arts. The third one was on, we went to Rosario, so it was more on the national Jewish scene of Argentina. Okay, along the way, I decided Argentina maybe had the biggest population, but it was not necessarily the center of the world, and certainly that there were important Jewish work being done elsewhere. And Marjorie lives 20 miles from where I live. I was asked by the University of New Mexico Press to do a book called King David's Harp, which was a collection of autobiographical essays by Latin American Jewish writers. Both Marjorie and Jose participated. The book won the National Jewish Book Award and sold out. We got a foothold into America, a small one, but a foothold. And so on. In 2007, I published an enormous, I have to say that enormous, it was 500 pages, anthology of Latin American Jewish writing. Half of it was devoted to poetry, half of it was devoted to prose. And it was an adventure for me, because I made it a point I had to cover all the countries of Latin America. Well, that didn't turn out to be quite possible. But with the exception of El Salvador, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic, I covered them. I found somebody. In Bolivia, I got somebody. Marjorie sent me to people. Other people connected me to people. And I'm very proud of that book because it covers the territory as of 2006, 2007. It starts with writers of the 70s and 80s and goes through to the latest writing was very close to the publication date. It was first printed by the Hostos Review in New York City by Isaac Goldenberg, a Peruvian Jewish writer. Later on, and just recently actually, I took the same book and put it online so that anybody, and it's gotten a lot of downloads. Meantime, I'm doing more poetry, and I'm going to Argentina, I'm going to Uruguay, I'm going to Mexico. I started going to Mexico and made a friend at Wellesley. This was a Marjorie connection. I met Angelina Muniz Uberman. I had a chat with her on the grass of Wellesley College, and we became fast friends. And I have been correspondence with her for years. I'm now writing an article about one of her novels. And so Mexico became my second home away from home. And again, the same thrust. We did, I've done two, what you might call them round tables, or presentación de libro, book presentations, where we had at least 5 Mexican Jewish writers in the mix. They weren't always fiction writers, but they were, and they were very astoundingly well attended. We had 100 people just did one night on a Tuesday. The other one maybe 80. The last then the art books. Perla Beider, an artist in Argentina, suggested to me that we put together, I didn't know what an art book was, put together a series where we take a poem and have an artist illustrate it. And that's what we did. We used poems that Jim and I had translated. So that was one continuum. I picked a poem from each poet, and then we sent it out after large discussions. Perla, Irene Hayevsky was our curator, and I were the centerpiece. But we found Bolivian artists, we found Costa Rican artists, we found, and we matched them to the extent that we could with the content of the poem. And they sent us original art. And then half handmade, half by printer, we put together these books. We put together a catalog, and we also put together a website. So again, to make original stuff, things made at that moment, sent to us by, things got stuck in Argentine customs because they said arte on the package. We eventually got all of it, and I've been touring with that collection. And it will be in the exhibit. It is in the exhibit here at UWM. So to finish up, I have met hundreds of artists and poets and writers along the way. Met in the sense of sometimes just an email correspondence, often in-person correspondence, and my friends in Argentina and Uruguay especially, with some in Mexico and one in Cuba, Juana Garcia Abbas in Cuba, have become my second family, have become my cousins, to use one of Marjorie's favorite poems, or best poem, or best wonderful poem. Who can say what is the best poem? And that comes back to where I started, the honorary business. I feel so comfortable with these people, and I find a fellow feeling that I don't find in the United States. I attend synagogue. I'm a fairly observant Jew, though I don't keep kosher. I don't have all that many American Jewish friends. But when I go south, be it Mexico, be it Costa Rica, that's another place I go often, I'm at home. And there's a synergy, so that not only do I capture what's been done and try to show it to the world, I've actually, and this is the part that thrills me the most and the part I'll end with, is I've actually been able to promote artists and writers to write more, to paint more. I mean, we've talked and they've gone and done something. Or they've talked and shown me some work and I've been able to publish it. Or 100 combinations. these get-togethers, and so that's the part that pleases me most. The ability, from a professor's point of view, the ability to actually get extremely talented, extremely educated, extremely Jewish in whatever way they define it, which is from the Orthodox in Mexico to the absolutely secular in Argentina, but to get these people to actually produce more and then find a way through the internet to get that production to anybody who wants it, that's been a thrill for me.
Thank you, Steve, and welcome to WM.